there is a headline here. I want you to check that out. It's, comparing it to modern day slavery. I don't necessarily like the reference, but I get it. And I'm sure that most of you can understand why I don't necessarily like the reference. But Australian Report advises urgent action to combat slavery in clean energy supply chains. And let's put up more from this article so that we will get a better understanding. The report entitled Addressing Modern Slavery in the Clean Energy Sector notes examples of worker enslavement and other abuses, including of children, from the Ecuadorian Amazon to China, where 2.6 million Uyghurs and Kazakh allegedly face forced or coerced labor, so-called re-education programs, and imprisonment in concentration camps. And that is coming from an article that was written by Brent in The Common Dreams. Further, the report also highlights the children labor running rampant in manganese and cobalt mining in Zambia and Congo, respectively, as well as in nickel production in the Philippines. Those three metals are critical to the manufacture of batteries. So again, we are being reminded that we are not far removed from anybody's abuse. That if people are being abused, whether those people are adults or children, anywhere in the world, there is some connection that we have in the United States of America, because we are indeed citizens of the world, and we ought to care about this report and to care about the crisis and how workers are being abused, and especially children. Ben?
Yeah, most definitely. And with this, I guess I kind of want to add like an asterisk or a grain of salt to like this report with the mindset of where do we go from here? Because the original report actually came from an industry trade group in Australia that they have their own economic interests, right? They want domestic production. And specifically right now, they're pushing to put sanctions on China, which China is the #1 producer in like renewable energies and things like that. And so they're pushing this for their economic aim. And that's one of the reasons why they combined like, things that are very well established that's going on in Central Africa and the Philippines and stuff like that, with stuff where the Human Rights Council at the United Nations has been like, well, we're a lot less certain about everything that's going on in China. And with a lot of countries saying that the United States is overblowing a lot of that. And so they say this with the mindset of you should support these sanctions. But the reality is, when you look at horrible working conditions around the world, a lot of them are actually driven by companies within the United States, Australia, Canada, the usual suspects, where they force these countries to adopt either special economic zones or specific exemptions from their labor laws in order to operate within these countries. I mean, sometimes the United States has a history of using the CIA and other methods to force these countries to accept like very, very low standards of working conditions. And so that's what we really need to understand, that the party is responsible for these human rights abuses. We shouldn't use it as an excuse to be xenophobic or escalate tensions with other countries. We should take a hard look at the companies, right? The profiteers within the United States that are taking these in and why they aren't doing anything about it. Because if they know about these issues within their supply chain, they could make demands because they're the one purchasing these things. And we could also, like, if we're so insistent on making all these trade deals across the world, we could actually, put in place labor protections in these trade deals that we have around the world. But the reality is that these trade deals get written on behalf of the giant corporations. And so too, unfortunately, do a lot of the specific exemptions to labor laws that these companies get in a lot of these different countries. And so what we have to walk away with from stories like this really is, where do we go from here? And where we go from here is focusing on the responsible parties of these giant corporations treating these workers so terribly.
That's right, and that we don't have clean hands. I mean, we really do not. Further in the report is an important and welcomed acknowledgement by industry of this problem and a first step towards addressing it. But we need to see industry, government, the financial sector, and civil society working together. And that really was the point that Ben was making too, to provide access to competitively cost slavery-free renewable energy. If we don't, modern slavery risks significantly complicating the just transition to a decarbonized economy. And that is coming from the Anti-Slavery Commissioner of New South Wales. And so all of this is infuriating. It is certainly heartbreaking, but the reach is widespread. Here's some alarming data from a 2021 report by International Labor that the 2021 global estimates indicate there are 50 million people in situations of modern slavery on any given day, either forced to work against their will or in a marriage that they were forced into. This number translates to nearly 1 of every 150 people in the world. And here is more data from the World Population Review. Take a look at this. The top 10 countries with the highest prevalence of modern slavery by slaves per 1,000 residents. And this is a global survey index from 2018. And we see the list of all of those countries, those places all around the world, from North Korea all the way to Cambodia. This is a shame. And if you think the United States is immune, I want you really to think again. Watch this.
The US Labor Department has accused a major cleaning company of using child labor on graveyard shifts at slaughterhouses. The federal agency says Packers Sanitation Services, Inc. employed at least 31 children, the youngest just 13 years old, at 3 JBS meat plants in Nebraska and Minnesota, and that the company likely employs far more children across its 400 other locations.
My God. All right, so we don't have clean hands in the United States of America. And this from a Slate article just a couple of weeks ago. In one example, 14-year-old worked through the night cleaning machines used to cut meat while attending Walnut Middle School. A report cited in the lawsuit detailed this child falling asleep in class and missing class as a result and suffering injuries from chemical burns. I thought, this was something of another century, but here we go, another 2 centuries, but here we are. So hello, child labor laws. Federal child labor law generally prohibits the employment of minors of non-agricultural occupations under the age of 14, restricts the hours and types of work that can be performed by minors under 16, and prohibits the employment of minors under the age of 18 in any hazardous occupation, usually. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things where like there's so many layers to this, but because one of the things that like our country does, especially like, private companies really push for. One of the reasons why private companies push so aggressively for border restrictions is because a lot of kids, a lot of people that end up in child labor situations in the United States are undocumented, right? And they quite literally have men with guns threatened in their direction saying, oh, we'll call ICE on you, we'll call the police on you, if you try and report us for all these terrible working conditions. And the unfortunate reality is those systems operate mostly to the benefit of those giant corporations. Another layer to this, and that wasn't mentioned in this story, but I think is relevant, especially considering the chart mentioned earlier about the amount of people in modern day slavery. The way that they calculate those, because like a lot of these nonprofit organizations take money from like giant corporations and whatnot, they'll include prison labor for other countries, but they don't include it for the United States, very conveniently enough. Because if you include prison labor with the United States figures in forced labor, then all of a sudden you realize that the United States is actually one of the worst offenders. And then if you even change the definition a little bit more to people working to the benefit of American corporations, then you realize globally that the United States by far is the worst offender. And so fundamentally, we need to understand and recognize that the very institutions that surround us every single day that are supposedly about protecting us and protecting children in our communities are actually the very same ones that are putting children in danger, that are forcing children to work in hazardous working conditions. And unfortunately, these giant companies, they're not paying costs for it, they're profiting off of it.
Yeah, they are. Again, no clean hands and a lot of people being complicit in this. So let's keep an eye on this. Again, what happens to one directly happens to us all indirectly. That is a forever quote by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.